Welcome back to episode 15, part 2 of the 755 Followed Me Home project, a documentary on rebuilding rather than replacing a classic 55 series tractor. In part 2, we'll complete the mundane job of adding the not so glamorous but necessary parts prior to starting the motor. Taking up where we left off, it's oil cooler installation time. Putting the oil cooler back on, you want to change these O-rings that have been in there for quite a while. It even feels better. It's protruding out of the fitting. Be very careful not to cross thread anything. Made sure that the O-ring was in there. Click. If you put the oil cooler in first, it's a little tight down in here. So what you have to do is pull the radiator up and push it back toward the motor, and then force the fuel tank down in. Then seat the radiator. The line to the fuel pump supply goes to the outboard line, and the injector return goes to the inboard line. I looked back at the video of taking it apart, and this bobbled headed kind of wire here went to the inboard connector, and the wire that was smooth went to the outboard. This goes to the hood light. Over time, the clamps anchoring the hood support rods can lift away from the hood support, letting the hood move around more than intended. I didn't think of recording it, but my favorite 2-pound hammer reconditioned both of these clamps nicely. I might also mention that one bolt had failed here, allowing the clamp to bend more to where the rod was about to come out. I always like to replace with the right bolt, the right nut. I also might recommend being very nice to your John Deere people, because sometimes you may only want 1 or 2 bolts and nuts. Anyway, they're good to have as good helpers to find things and be patient with you, even if you need a couple of small pieces. Anyway, when you have time, inspect and tighten these clamps and watch for stiff breezes when opening the hood. Of course, you have to be ready for this. When I was getting ready to put this last bolt in, that J-nut or whatever they call this thing broke off of the back, so now I have to take the bolts out and put another one of those in. So as it was, I had another one of these handy, and just want to mention that these clips are actually cheaper from John Deere, and they're metric, but they're cheaper than the hardware store. Which I was kind of surprised at that, and the hardware store didn't have metric. And I've mentioned it before, I like to have all the bolts the correct threads. I don't want to have somebody else have to go through what I've had to go through. Oh, maybe that bolt's a little short. No, it's all the way through. Okay, we're good. And I want to mention here to any of the viewers or the old timers that see that I'm not just painting over everything, cleaning it all up. I'm not restoring this tractor or any of these tractors to like an original showroom condition. I'm leaving as much of the original paint as possible so the guy could see what it actually looked like before I got my hands on it. So some of those things you're going to see, you're wondering why aren't they painted or why are the bolt heads rusty? Well, that's why. Okay, well, that being said, yes, a few of the pieces that were rusty and scratched and such, I put some primer on and then some Blitz Black from John Deere. It's always nice when something starts going back together. Then you wonder, well, did I forget anything? Well, thankfully, I have a lot of pictures and a lot of video. So if there's a question about how things used to look, I can refer back to that. So the valve cover gasket comes pre-formed. I'd already rechecked the valve clearances to 8 thousandths. They're all good to go. I'll just put those finger tight for right now. The air cleaner bracket is kind of a touchy subject. You'll notice here this one has been reinforced. This area right here is susceptible to vibration breakage and fracture. It would be nice if they had something else supporting it from the engine or the valve cover, but unfortunately they don't. And it's worth noting that this bracket and some of the panel needs to come off in order to take the valve cover off to check the valves. You can get to the rear glow plug that's back in here by using a flex joint on your deep well socket. Well, fortunately, while I was reviewing video, I noticed that when I'd put the valve cover on, the gasket had fallen out. And I hadn't tightened the bolts up yet because I was still waiting on some seals. So the valve cover's got to come back off and check that gasket. And before I can do that, I need to take the air cleaner bracket back off. Now we'll see if it falls out. Yep. So to keep that from happening again, I'm going to take a little bit of gasket maker and just put a couple little touches of it in that chamfer, just enough to keep that gasket in place while we put it in. Pretty sticky stuff. I don't believe that'll hurt it a bit. And just make that that job that much easier. And here's another thing we want to look at. It's these smashed O-rings. Got the John Deere part number. Oh, let me compare these two. One of them's pretty well flat, went down in the hole. So they're cheap and certainly worth replacing. You want to replace these O-rings that hold the valve covers down, because over time these washers get flat. I don't know if you can see that, but they get flat enough that they can't be tightened down except to the valve cover. I don't know if you can hear that. So your seal starts not sealing. So just replace those O-rings. And now we're going to torque these down to 160 inch-pounds. When you start buttoning up the back part of the engine, first thing you need to do in this series of panels is to put this vertical panel in place first. Otherwise, if you put the muffler in first, it won't clear. This panel won't clear between the muffler and the power steering valve. Now with this panel in there, you can still leave it loose, but the muffler can be installed from the right side of the tractor. And now with the muffler installed, we'll tighten down the exhaust manifold bolts to 19 foot-pounds, 230 inch-pounds. Well, I took a hammer and I smoothed this just enough so that it'll go easier over the muffler. There we go. Now I'll go underneath and get those bolts in. I haven't tightened all these bolts down yet because I want to get this all fit together where it's supposed to be before I do. Here's another thing you can run into, just even an exhaust pipe clamp. These are both 1.5-inch clamps. Notice how they're made. The one I got from John Deere has a relief here, so this can bend a little bit around the pipe. This one doesn't. You can also notice the difference in size between the two, also the width between them. Pretty close. The one that came on this tractor has these big holes to accommodate the bigger bracket. One for John Deere, they're a little bit smaller. And this is the one we're going to put on the tractor. We all get into situations where we don't have the right part to fix whatever we're working on. Whether we can't find it, or maybe it's too expensive and you don't want to spend that kind of money on it. But if you can, it just makes good business sense. And I always feel a little better about it when I have taken a few extra steps just to put it back like it was. I'm going to leave this about like that, I think, because I don't know how much room I'm going to have with this exhaust heat shield. Let's back up here and see how it fits. That's going to go okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put this bolt in before I put this into place. So I'll just drop it down and take it out of the... Oh, those lock washers are holding it. So I'm going to take it down out of the way after I drop the socket. So I want to leave this loose for now till I get this fixed in here. Now, one thing you don't want to forget to do before you bolt this all together is get the throttle cable in place. It goes through a frame. Goes through a piece of the frame. And it looks like this is going to fasten up there just fine. So now it's in place. We won't bother with adjusting that just now, but we want to get the battery tray in place. Can't quite see it, but there's a bolt goes through here. Again, I'm going to leave these a little loose because we have one more thing to add to this little ensemble, and that's the bulkhead. Coming up in episode 16, we'll finish the engine compartment, check out the injection pump, and hopefully have engine start.